Hello and welcome to the Write channel where we talk all things creative writing. My name's Nicola Monaghan and I'm a prize-winning author from Nottingham in the United Kingdom, and today's video is all about writing your first draft. So the main thing with the first draft is just to actually get it done, to get those words down on paper. This is the first time that you're really fully going to develop your ideas and your characters and your storylines and write some scenes that are going to be your story. So that can be quite challenging, and actually first drafts are often very messy. The kind of writer you are will dictate what kind of first draft you write, so whether it's messy or actually quite well edited. People work in very different ways. So some people write really fast, really dirty first drafts. Some people even call it a zero draft to help give themselves the confidence and the freedom to write really messily. Other people find that impossible and find that they really need to edit as they go along and try and at least do some of that perfecting of the writing as they're writing. That means their first drafts take quite a lot longer, but the advantage of that method is that usually you need fewer drafts. When you're doing this for the first time, you're going to find out so much about who you are as a writer, and the best way to do it really is to try different things and find out what suits you. So try writing fast and dirty and see how that feels. Do you feel like you're doing what you need to? Are you able to get words on paper? Does it feel like a productive process? And if not, and if you just feel like you really want to edit at least a little bit as you go, then try that and see how much it slows you down and whether it feels better. Even a few novels in, someone like me who's written 6 of them, I still try different things when I'm drafting. So for example, one of the things I'm considering trying next is a zero draft, where you give yourself that ultimate freedom to be as messy as you need to be and even put lots of notes and gaps and whatever into your text. So always be prepared to try something new and always be prepared to learn about who you are as a writer. You're almost certainly not going to get this right absolutely first time, so it is about experimenting and finding out what works for you. You might have quite a detailed plan before you start this first draft, or you might not. You might be completely pantsing it, and either is fine. It really doesn't matter. The only thing that does matter is that you've got the momentum to start writing and to keep going. And you can see my previous video on plotting versus pantsing for some tips to help with that. This first time is all about finding the things that work for you. So there will be a bit of trial and error, and there will definitely be bad days. There are bad days for anybody writing a first draft of the novel, no matter how experienced they are. So you need to accept that that's going to happen, and you need to have a plan for when it happens, and you need to just keep on keeping on despite the hurdles and despite the blips along the way, because the most important thing is to get to the end of it. If you're planning a quick, messy draft, which is what I mostly recommend, partly because that's what works for me, then you're going to work quite hard at turning off that internal editor. Now, one of the tricks for me in doing this is to think of that internal editor as a person. So I think of her as being a woman of about my age who kind of sits in the back of my head and nags me about the little sentences, and I focus quite hard at visualising telling her to stop. You need to find a trick that works for you. Obviously that one might sound a little bit off the wall and a bit mad, but that is what works for me and helps me stop her. The important thing is to turn off that editor while you're writing this draft, because this is really all about the ideas and the story and bringing those characters to life. It's certainly not about the words and sentences, and that's probably the thing your internal editor will be focusing on the most. So try and turn your internal editor off and just get to the end of the draft. And really, one of your biggest enemies while you're writing this first draft is the blank page, because sitting down in front of a blank page at the beginning of a story or the beginning of a chapter can be quite scary, and you really don't know where to start. So it's finding ways to trick yourself into starting writing, which can be really key here. So some things you might try. You might try the technique of morning pages, where you sit down in the morning and you just free write for a certain set amount of time. Now that's not writing that's going to go into your book, that's other writing. But the idea of morning pages is that they can just get you into the zone to actually start the writing that you're going to do on your actual project. In a similar way, sometimes you can do writing prompts before you start writing. So I've got a list of writing prompts on my Twitter, which I'll again link to below. And if you do those sometimes first thing in the morning or first thing in a writing session before you try to actually work on your novel and your project, again, it's something that can get you into that zone so you're ready to write. Another trick is to stop the writing at just the right place. So you might be right in the middle of a writing session, you might be just about to finish a chapter, you know exactly what the ending of that chapter is going to be, it's quite exciting, the momentum's going. stop before you write it, because then when you sit down the next day, you're in a really good place to start writing again, because you know what you're going to write and you're quite excited about writing it. Another trick that helps a lot of people is what I call flow charting. So this is where you write a scene and then you write a quick flow chart of the action that's going to happen next in the next few scenes or the next chapter, so that when you sit down again to write the next scene, you've at least got some idea where it's going and it's not a complete question mark. Another thing that lots of writers I know do is a kind of edit-write cycle. So they might use afternoons to produce their new writing and to write new scenes. And then in the morning they edit those scenes before they go on to write new stuff that afternoon as well. So the idea of that is that you get your head back into the project and the idea, and you get your writing brain turned on again. And then in the afternoon you're ready to write the new stuff. Now, another thing that a lot of writers I know use is a daily word count. So they set themselves a daily word count. I mean, it might be 500 words, 1,000 words, and they try and write that number of words a day. And once they've written that number of words a day, they're allowed to stop. Now, the thing about this is often by the time you reach that word count amount, you've built momentum and actually you don't want to stop and you carry on writing and have even more words. But knowing that you're going to produce this number of words a day, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel and you know you're going to finish the book. So that can be really encouraging. And when you make your word count, there's a sense of satisfaction too. My only warning on this is to make it something achievable. If any of you have ever tried National Novel Writing Month, you might have tried the 1666 words a day. Now, for me, that's a real challenge. So when I do try NaNoWriMo, I find I'm falling behind, and actually that's really discouraging. And in fact, I end up writing less because of it. So it is important, I think, for the word count to be achievable. For me, 1,000 words a day is very achievable, and 500 words a day is also very achievable. So working with that kind of word count works for me. You might not have the time to write a 500 or 1,000 words a day. That can be quite a challenge if you're busy with other things, if you're a parent, if you are working in a job that's quite busy and quite stressful. You might find that you can't quite make that much time. One of my students in the past actually used to write when she went to bed, and she literally used to go to bed and write 200 words. Now, doing it that way meant it took her just over a year to write her first draft, but she got it written, and that's the important thing. So be realistic about the time you've got, set yourself an appropriate word count, and you can get there. And you know you can get there because you can count up how long it's going to take you to get there. So I think this can be really helpful just in terms of structuring your day, working out how you're going to do it, and just making sure the words get written. Now, it doesn't work for everybody. Not everybody likes the kind of pressure of a daily word count target. Lots of people find it quite discouraging if they don't then make that target. So there are other ways of doing this, and one of the things you can think about is actually not setting a word count target, but setting a time at your desk target. So in this case, instead of saying I'm definitely going to write 1,000 words a day or 500 words a day or even 200 words a day, you just make a promise to yourself that you're going to go and sit at your desk for 1 hour, 2 hours, however many hours you can put aside for this, and you're going to sit at your desk for that amount of time and you are going to work on this project. Now, you're not necessarily going to be writing for this whole time. It might be that you do a bit of planning, it might be that you do a bit of doodling and notes, or it might be that you just stare out of the window for at least some of the time thinking about the project. The thing is, it doesn't matter. The point is going to your desk, putting that time aside and sitting there and focusing on your project. And if you do that every day for long enough, you will get that first draft written. So this is better if you're the kind of person who would find it discouraging if you missed your word target. This is the kind of thing where you can't really fail. All you have to do is go and sit at your desk and be with your project for a certain number of hours. And the theory really is a little bit if you build it, they will come. So a little bit Field of Dreams. If you sit there with your project, it will happen. And my experience is that actually it does. These are my takeaways. The first one is set time aside. Make sure you give yourself some time to work on your draft. And if you do that, you should get to the end eventually. My second is to try different things. Try fast and dirty drafting. And if that doesn't work for you, then try editing in the morning and writing in the afternoon. Try all these different things until you find a process that suits you and makes you feel like you're making the kind of progress that you want to. Trick yourself into writing, so don't just sit there and be afraid of the blank page. Do a writing prompt or a writing exercise or morning pages to get your head into the zone and trick yourself into writing the next bit. Try not to sweat the quality too much during the first draft. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be rubbish, and everybody works at a different level of fast and dirty, and it really is up to you and the kind of writer you are, and finding that level is part of the important part of writing your first draft. However, you do at least to some extent need to turn off that internal editor. So tell her where to go, get rid of her, and get the first draft finished. So I have a mantra that I say to myself when I'm writing my first draft, and that is, I'll deal with that in the second draft. And that's important. It's important to put aside some of the quality issues until the next draft, because this is all about developing your ideas and letting the story flow. So remember that. I'll do that in the second draft. It can be your mantra too if you want. It works for me. You are welcome to borrow it. It's also okay to use shortcuts, so you can put notes to yourself in the drafts. And certainly if something comes up that needs researching, I would just put a little note that you need to research it, and try not to worry about it too much. Try not to let it stop you. That's the important thing. Similarly, if you feel like you haven't quite got the right word or the right phrasing for something, just highlight the text so you know that's something you wanted to look at, rather than spending too much time agonizing and letting it slow you down. Because the important thing, again, as I'll say over and over again, is to get to the end of the draft. So even though I advocate writing a messy and dirty first draft, if you can do it that way, because getting a first draft quickly for me is a better way to do it than having to take years and years over writing a first draft. So although that is my general advice, I also say that you want to try and get some of the basic aspects of the writing correct anyway. You want to really write as well as you can, even though you're writing quickly. So some of the things to bear in mind in order to write as well as you can. Try to write in scenes and keep the action really immediate so that it feels like the reader is there with you in the room, witnessing the things that happen. So related to that, try not to do too much exposition, so too much telling of the backstory or related information, just listed as information or explained as information. That can be a really boring read, and often the tendency is to do that right at the beginning of the story, so try to avoid that if you can, and instead of telling it all in one big chunk, try to drip feed that stuff in. So try and give those little facts as and when the reader needs them in a quick shot, so that it doesn't ever feel to them that they're reading loads of information in a big long list. Try to keep your writing vivid. Now, you might have heard in a lot of places people saying show, don't tell, and that's a fairly good rule of thumb. It is about a balance. You can't literally show everything, because if you show absolutely everything, your novel's going to be like 300 gazillion words long, and that's no good to anybody. But you do want to get the balance right, and particularly if it's something important, you need to try and show it on the page, especially stuff about character. Because let's say, for example, someone talked to you about one of their friends and they said, oh, they're not very honest. Well, you might believe them saying that, but if you saw that person lying, you would believe it more. And that's the principle of show, don't tell. I do have a little video with my dog in where she's demonstrating show, don't tell in one of my short videos here. So check that out if you want to, because that's quite good fun and hopefully demonstrates the concept. Make sure you know your characters. Now, for me, to really know my characters, I have to meet them on the page. But even so, I'll often fill out character profiles and do little character questionnaires just to get to know who they are in my own head. So that's quite important. Really try to make sure you know your characters before you start the draft, because they're all important to the plot, in my opinion. The biggest criticism a lot of writers get, if you look at reviews on Amazon, on Goodreads, on all of those places, the biggest single criticism that I see there is two-dimensional characters, characters that people don't like or don't believe in. So it is really, really important to get your characters right. And I'd say that was probably the most important thing to know really well before you start that first draft. And try as far as possible not to use passive voice. It can sometimes be appropriate too, but most of the time it's better to be active. So an example of that: the cup was picked up. That's passive voice, and that's not the best way to describe it. The best way to describe it is to say, she picked up the cup. So those few things are my major principles, the main things that I try to do to try to make sure my writing is as good as it can be in that first draft. All that said, I wouldn't want you to worry too much about any of that stuff in your first draft. The main thing is to get your story down, to bring your characters to life, and to play with those ideas and make that draft happen. The main thing is just to get to the end. So the most important thing of all of those things is to work on that internal editor and turn her off. So the next video in this series is all about what comes next, the editing and drafting process. So once you've got that first draft, what do you do with it? I'm going to tell you all about that in the next video. Also coming up soon, I'm going to give you an annotated reading of some of my own writing to explain to you how I structured a scene and the techniques that I was using and the craft ideas that came into my writing at that point. Thanks so much for watching, and hopefully see you in the next one. Take care.